The message that stopped everything the rain had been falling since early morning. Soft at first, like a whisper against the windows of Sundar Pichai's office. Then heavier, turning the glass into a blurred curtain of silver. Inside, the soft hum of computers and the muted sound of voices in distant hallways created a strange calm. Sundar sat at his desk, scanning through the endless flood of emails, meeting requests and urgent messages that filled his day. For years, this had been his routine wake-up before sunrise. Step into a world that demanded constant attention and end the day long after the city lights had faded. But that day, something felt different. He wasn't sure why at first. Maybe it was the way the rain seemed to slow everything down, or maybe it was the faint, unexplainable heaviness in his chest that had been there since morning. As he reached for his coffee, his phone lit up with a notification. Just another message, he thought, but his eyes froze on the screen. It was a name. A name he hadn't seen or heard in 20 years. Anjali. For a moment. The room felt quieter, as if even the rain had stopped to listen. His heart gave a strange, heavy thump, and his fingers hovered over the screen, almost afraid to touch it. Memories rushed forward, memories of a small college library in Chennai, of stolen glances during study breaks, of long walks under the scorching summer sun, of laughter that felt like it could last a lifetime. She had been his first love, the one person who had seen him not as the quiet, uncertain boy he was, but as someone who could be more. 20 years had passed since they last spoke. Life had taken them in different directions, and Sundar had buried those memories deep, convincing himself that some chapters were meant to be closed forever. But now, her name was right there on his phone, glowing like a small light in the dark. He hesitated, staring at the notification. What could she possibly want after all this time? Was it a simple hello? A curious message to see where life had taken him? Or was it something heavier, something that couldn't wait? The unknown gnawed at him, pulling him back to the moment. His assistant knocked lightly on the door, reminding him about an upcoming meeting, but Sundar barely heard her. Instead, he opened the message. Hi, Sundar. I know it's been so long. I hope you are well. I don't even know if you will see this, but there's something important I have to tell you. Please let me know if we can talk. His eyes lingered on every word. There was no small talk, no casual mention of the past. Only a strange urgency hiding behind the politeness of her tone. And it was that urgency that sent a shiver down his spine. The meeting could wait. Everything could wait. He typed back slowly, choosing his words with care. Anjali, I saw your message. I'm here. What's going on? Within seconds, the typing dots appeared. It was as if she had been waiting all along, her fingers ready, her thoughts already formed. But then the dots vanished, as if she had changed her mind. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the phone, wondering why, after 2 decades, this one conversation felt more important than the countless negotiations, presentations, and decisions he made daily. He thought about their last meeting, how they had stood on the crowded train platform. The smell of diesel and rain in the air, her eyes holding something she never said out loud. That day, she had boarded the train without looking back, and he had told himself to move on. Now she was back in his life, even if only through a few lines on a glowing screen. After a long pause, her reply came. It's not something I can explain here. Can we meet? It's about something from our past, something I never told you. His pulse quickened. The years between them vanished in an instant, replaced by 1,000 unspoken questions. What could she possibly have hidden for so long? Why now? And why did he feel a mixture of dread and anticipation twisting in his chest? He replied, Tell me where. This time, the dots stayed. I'm in San Francisco. I'll be at the old cafe on Pine Street tomorrow, 4 p.m., Pine Street. He hadn't been there in years. That little cafe had been their place, the spot where they shared cheap tea, talked about impossible dreams, and sketched out futures neither of them could predict. Sundar sat there for a long time after the conversation ended, staring at the rain sliding down the glass. The meeting he had scheduled was forgotten. The only thing he could think about was tomorrow 4, p.m. and the look he imagined she would have when she saw him after all this time. But as he finally rose from his chair and walked toward the window, something deep inside whispered that this wasn't just a reunion. It was the opening of a door to a past he thought was sealed. A past that could change everything he thought he knew about himself. And he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever she had to tell him, it wasn't going to be easy to hear the cafe on Pine Street. Next day seemed longer than any Sundar could remember in years. His morning began like any other calls from overseas partners. Updates from his leadership team, endless files waiting for his review, but his focus was elsewhere. Each time his phone buzzed, he hoped it was Anjali, maybe giving a hint of what she wanted to say, maybe breaking the suspense that had taken root in his mind. But she didn't send another word. And that silence, more than anything, made the hours stretch endlessly by lunchtime. Even the smallest sounds felt too loud, the shuffle of papers on his desk, the faint tapping of a colleague's shoes outside his office door. He kept glancing at the clock, counting the minutes until he could leave. It wasn't like him to be so distracted. Normally he could block out anything when there was work to be done. But this was different. This wasn't a quarterly report or a technical crisis. This was a chapter from his life he thought he had left behind, suddenly reappearing with words that carried both urgency and mystery. By 3:15 p.m., Sundar couldn't sit still anymore. He left the office earlier than planned, telling his assistant he had an appointment without offering details. The sky over San Francisco had cleared after the rain, leaving the streets washed clean, the air smelling faintly of wet earth and coffee. As he walked toward Pine Street, every step seemed to carry him deeper into the past. He remembered the first time he and Anjali had gone to that cafe. It had been a tiny place even then, with chipped wooden tables and mismatched chairs, run by an old couple who treated every customer like family. They had spent hours there, sipping tea and talking about everything, books, dreams, the small details of their days. Sometimes they had no money for tea, and the owners would still serve them with a smile, saying, "You can pay later." As he approached the cafe now, Sundar noticed it hadn't changed much. The faded green awning was still there, though the paint was peeling at the edges. The same brass bell hung above the door, ready to chime with every entry. The sight pulled at something inside him, a bittersweet ache he hadn't felt in decades. He stepped inside. The place smelled of roasted coffee beans and fresh bread, just as he remembered. Sunlight poured in through the tall windows, casting warm golden patterns on the floor. And then, across the room, he saw her. Anjali was seated at a corner table, her hand wrapped around a cup of tea. Her hair was shorter now, with strands of silver that caught the light, and there were faint lines at the corners of her eyes, signs of years lived, of stories untold. But when she looked up and their eyes met, he saw something that hadn't changed at all. It was the same softness, the same quiet strength, the same way she seemed to see right through him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she smiled, tentative, unsure, and he found himself walking toward her as if pulled by something he couldn't resist. "Hi, Sundar," she said softly when he reached her table. "Hi, Anjali." He sat down across from her, feeling an odd mix of nervousness and comfort. "It's been a long time." 20 years, she replied, her gaze steady, but her voice tinged with something heavier. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "You asked me to," he said, "and you said it was important." She nodded, looking down at her tea. For a few seconds she didn't speak, and Sundar noticed how tightly she was holding the cup, as if drawing warmth from it. Finally, she took a slow breath. "I thought about this moment for years," she began. "So many times I told myself to forget it, to let it go, but then I couldn't. It kept coming back, in dreams, in the quiet moments. And when I saw your name in the news again last week, I knew I couldn't keep it inside any longer." Her words made his stomach tighten. "Keep what inside?" She hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the window, where people passed by in the late afternoon light. "Before I tell you, I need you to promise you'll listen until the end. No interruptions, no questions until I'm done. Can you do that? He nodded slowly. I can. She set the cup down, her hands now folded in her lap. Back in Chennai? Before we lost touch, there was something I found out. Something about you. And I didn't tell you because I thought it would ruin everything. But maybe it would have changed the way your life turned out. He frowned slightly, feeling a rush of questions he had promised not to ask. Anjali, I continued, her voice dropping almost to a whisper. It's about your family. Something your father never told you. Something that involves me. The air between them felt suddenly heavier, as though the walls of the cafe had shifted closer. Sundar's mind was racing, but he forced himself to stay still, to keep his promise. Anjali looked into his eyes, and for the first time, he saw fear there, not fear of him, but fear of the truth she was about to speak. After all these years, she said, I think it's time you know who you really are. Asterisk the truth, she. Carried words hung in the air between them like fragile glass, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. Sundar sat perfectly still, his hands resting loosely on the table, though inside his chest there was a storm-building curiosity, unease, and a deep, unsettling pull toward whatever truth Anjali was about to uncover. Outside, the city moved on as if nothing in the world had changed. Cars rolled past. Pedestrians crossed streets, the golden glow of late afternoon settling across Pine Street. But here, at this small table in the corner of an old cafe, time felt suspended. Anjali's fingers traced the rim of her teacup, not quite looking at him. It wasn't hesitation in the usual sense. It was more like she was gathering the courage to open a door she had been guarding for decades. Do you remember? She began slowly. The summer before we both left Chennai. The summer after our final exams. He nodded, the memories flickering to life in his mind. Long, scorching days broken by evening breezes from the bay. Endless conversations about the future hers in social work, his uncertain but full of possibility. The day they had said goodbye still vivid in his memory. The crowded station, her hand slipping from his as the train began to move. I remember. He said quietly, there was something that happened that summer. She continued, something I never told you. I met someone you know, though you might not remember him well. It was your father. That caught him off guard. His father had been a man of few words, practical and steady, never one to get involved in the details of his children's friendships. You met my father? Sundar asked, unable to keep the surprise from his voice. Anjali gave a faint, almost sad smile. Yes, he came to see me one evening, just after sunset. I didn't understand why at first. I thought maybe it was about you. Maybe he wanted to thank me for helping you with your studies. But instead, he asked me to do something. Something. I thought it was for your good at the time. But now, after all these years, I'm not sure. Sundar felt a tightening in his chest. What did he ask you to do? She took a breath, her voice growing softer. He asked me to walk away, to disappear from your life, to make sure you focused on your future without distractions. She paused, her eyes clouding, but it wasn't just that. He told me something else, something about your family history, something he said you weren't ready to know. He told me that if I stayed, the truth would come out too soon, and it might ruin the path he had planned for you. Sundar's mind was spinning now, piecing together fragments of memory he hadn't thought about in years, moments when his father seemed unusually tense. The way he would change the subject when certain topics came up. .njl. I looked down. Her voice breaking slightly. I agreed. I told him I would leave. And I did, but before I left, he told me what that truth was. And I've carried it with me ever since. Sundar leaned forward slightly, his voice low but steady. Anjali, what? Was it? She hesitated, her lips pressing together as if holding back the words, then finally met his eyes. He told me that the man you've always called your father isn't your biological father, and that your real father was someone from my own family. The sound of the cafe faded, replaced by the pounding of his heartbeat. It was an Impossible sentence, yet spoken with the kind of quiet conviction that told him she believed every word. What are you saying? His voice was rougher now, though he didn't raise it. I'm saying, she continued, that your real father was my uncle, a man who left Chennai years before you were born. Your mother knew him before she met the man you've called your father. And when you were born, they decided it would be better, safer for everyone if the truth stayed hidden. Sundar sat back, his mind searching desperately for solid ground. Memories of his childhood flashed by his father's distant, but steady presence, his mother's quiet moments when she seemed lost in thought, the occasional visit from distant relatives he barely knew. Had there been clues all along? Had he simply never noticed? Anjali's eyes were glistening now, though she blinked back the tears. I kept it to myself because I didn't want to hurt you. I thought maybe it didn't matter. You had a father who raised you, cared for you. But when I left, I carried the guilt, the weight of knowing. I thought maybe I'd done the right thing. But now, I'm not sure if I robbed you of the chance to know who you truly are. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Sundar's hands were clasped together tightly on the table, his mind a tangle of questions and disbelief. He wanted to ask how she could be certain, why she had chosen this moment to tell him, and whether any of it could be proven. But part of him knew the answers might hurt even more than the questions. Outside, the light was beginning to fade, and shadows stretched across the street. The cafe felt smaller now, almost claustrophobic, as if the weight of the past was pressing against the walls. Anjali reached for her cup again, but didn't drink. There's more, she said quietly. Something about why your father, both of them, made that choice. And about what happened to my uncle after he left. Sundar looked at her, his pulse still racing. What do you mean, there's more? Her gaze held his, unwavering. You deserve to know everything, but if I tell you the rest, it will change how you see your family forever. Asterisk, the story buried for decades space between Sundar and Anjali felt charged, as if the air itself had grown heavier. The faint clinking of spoons and soft murmur of voices in the cafe faded to a distant hum, replaced by the quiet throb of his own heartbeat in his ears. The revelation she had just dropped into his world was already reshaping everything he thought he knew about himself. But now, the promise of more and more history, more truth pulled him deeper into a place he wasn't sure he wanted to go. I didn't rush. She sat with her back straight, her eyes steady but softened by something like regret. She was measuring each word before letting it leave her lips, as though she knew that once spoken, there would be no way to take it back. My uncle's name was Raghavan, she began, her voice low and deliberate. To me, he was the uncle who always brought sweets when he visited, who told the funniest stories at family gatherings. But to others, he was different. He was ambitious, restless, never content to stay in one place for too long. People in my family used to whisper about him, how he had dreams that were too big for Chennai, how he wanted to make a life somewhere else, far away from the expectations of the community. And one day, without warning, he left. No letter, no goodbyes. Just gone. She paused for a moment, glancing at the rainwater streaks still drying on the cafe window. It wasn't until years later that I learned why he left. He'd been in love with your mother, but she was engaged to the man you grew up calling your father. It was a scandal no one wanted to admit happened. They met in secret for a while. But when the pressure from both families became unbearable, he disappeared. And a few months after he left, you were born. Sundar felt as though the ground beneath him was shifting grain by grain. His mind jumped from one memory to another, his mother's occasional silences, the way her eyes sometimes clouded when old stories came up, the quiet tension that always seemed to hang in the air when certain relatives were mentioned. My uncle didn't just vanish into nothing, Anjali continued. He went abroad. I only know bits and pieces letters sent to my father from faraway places. Money he sent back when he could. But then, when I was about 14, a letter came that was different. It was from him, but it was about you. He said he had been following your life from a distance. He knew your school, your achievements, even the subjects you were excelling. He wrote that he was proud, though he didn't know who he was. And he said, one day he would come back. Sundar's hands tightened on the edge of the table, but he never did. She shook her head slowly. No, at least not to my knowledge. There were rumors that he fell ill, that he had debts, that he was trying to come back but couldn't, and then silence. No more letters, no more money, no word at all. My family stopped speaking about him entirely, as if erasing him would erase the past. There was a raw ache in her voice now, and Sundar could see that this was not just about him. It was about her too. About the weight her family had made her carry. When your legal father came to see me that summer, she said, he told me all of this in one breath, as if he'd been holding it in for years. He said he needed me to walk away so that you could have a clean break from anything connected to Raghavan. He said it was the only way to protect you from shame and distraction. And I believed him. I thought I was helping you. But the truth is I was helping him keep the secret. Her eyes met his again, steady despite the emotion soaring behind them. And now, after all these years, I don't know if I did the right thing. I don't know if keeping this from you spared you pain, or if it just stole your chance to know where you really came from. Sundar leaned back, his gaze dropping to the table. The wood grain swirled in uneven lines, and for a moment it became the only thing he could focus on. He felt the echo of every decision that had been made for him, decisions about who he would love, what he would know, and even the identity he carried without question. His voice was quiet when he finally spoke. Why now, Anjali? After all this time, why come to me with this? She hesitated, then drew a folded piece of paper from her bag. It was creased, the edges worn, as though it had been handled countless times. She pushed it across the table toward him, because last week, she said, I received this. It came from an address I didn't recognize, but the handwriting, I knew it immediately. It's from him, Sundar, from Raghavan, and he's asking to see you. The paper lay between them, an unassuming object that suddenly felt like the most dangerous thing in the room. Sundar's eyes locked on it, but he didn't reach for it, not yet. There's something else, she added, her voice tightening. He says there's something urgent he needs to tell you, and that if you don't come soon, you might never get the chance to hear it. Sundar looked at her, the weight of the moment pressing in from all sides. Where is he? Anjali took a slow breath. He's here, in this city. For the first time in hours, Sundar felt the air in his lungs hitch. The past he thought had been buried in another country, another lifetime, was here close enough to touch. Asterisk the letter in. Shaking hands for a long moment, Sundar didn't move. The folded paper sat between them, silent yet heavy with the kind of weight no object its size should carry. It was strange he had faced rooms full of investors, negotiations worth billions, decisions that would shape the future of industries, and yet nothing had ever made his hands feel this uncertain. This was not a deal to close or a strategy to execute. This was his life, possibly rewritten in a few lines of ink. He finally reached for the letter, his fingers brushing the rough, worn edges. The paper was thin, fragile, as though it might tear if held too tightly. Slowly, he unfolded it, thought the handwriting was neat, but slightly uneven, like someone who had once written with confidence, but now carried the tremor of age or illness. The first line made his chest tighten instantly. My son, I do not know if you will read this. Perhaps you will throw it away. Perhaps you will never believe it is me. But if you are reading, then I have one chance to tell you what I should have told you long ago. His eyes scanned the words, each sentence pulling him deeper into a history he'd never been told. Raghavan wrote about the early days, about meeting his mother, about the choices that tore them apart. He spoke of watching from afar as Sundar grew, resisting the urge to reach out, always convincing himself that the time wasn't right. Told myself I was protecting you. I told myself you would have a better life without the burden of my mistakes. But the truth is, I was protecting myself from the pain of rejection. I thought I had forever to fix it. Now I know I do not. Sundar's Hands tightened on the paper as he read on. Raghavan wrote about an illness, one that had left him weak and uncertain of how much time he had left. He didn't name it, but his words carried the quiet urgency of someone counting the days. There's something you must know before I go. Something that will change the way you see not only me, but yourself. There are things about your family, about the life you believe was yours, that are built on decisions made in desperation. I cannot undo them, but I can give you the truth. If you will let me. At the bottom of the letter was an address, small apartment in a quieter part of San Francisco, and a final plea. Please come before Friday. After that, I may not be here to tell you. Sundar lowered the paper slowly, his mind spinning. It was Tuesday. That meant 3 days. 3 days to decide whether to open the door to a man who might be a stranger, or the missing part of his life he had never known. Anjali was watching him closely, her hands folded on the table. I've been to that address, she said softly. It's real, he's there, but he's not well, Sundar. When I saw him, he looked smaller. Somehow, not the man I remember. But his eyes, they lit up when I mentioned you. He tried to speak, but his throat felt tight. He had so many questions. Why now? What truth could possibly change his life so completely? What exactly had been kept from him? But the answers were all sitting in that small apartment, waiting. Why? Did he reach out through you? Sundar asked finally. Anjali, I hesitated. Because he didn't think you'd come if he wrote to you directly. He thought you might see him as nothing more than the man who abandoned your mother. But he knew you'd trust me. Or at least, he hoped you would. Sundar stared down. At the letter again? The neat handwriting seemed almost at odds with the weight of what it carried. Somewhere in the city, a man he might call his father was waiting for him, holding a truth that had been buried for decades. What do you want to do? Anjali asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer immediately. Part of him wanted to walk away, to let the past remain where it was, sealed and silent. But another part, the part that had stared at this woman's name on his phone yesterday and felt the ground shift, knew he wouldn't. He had to see Raghavan. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. I'll go, he said finally. Tomorrow. Anjali exhaled slowly, as though she'd been holding her breath. I can take you there, she offered, but Sundar shook his head. No, I need to do this alone. They left the cafe together, but their steps were quieter now, heavier with the knowledge of what lay ahead. The city around them carried on lights switching on in shop windows, the hum of traffic rising, but for Sundar, everything had narrowed to one address, one door, and one conversation he had waited his whole life to have without even knowing it. And yet, as he walked back toward his car, a thought crept into his mind that he couldn't shake. What if the truth Raghavan wanted to tell him wasn't about love, or sacrifice, or reconciliation? What if it was something darker? Something that might not just change his life, but break it? Asterisk the man behind the door next morning. Sundar woke before dawn. He lay in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the city outside his window. Normally, mornings were his calmest hours, a quiet coffee, slow read through overnight updates before the flood of meetings began. But today, every tick of the clock felt louder than it should, every minute heavier than the last dot he had decided. He was going to see Raghavan, but the decision didn't bring relief. It only made the weight in his chest more solid. By 9 a.m., the city was fully awake. Sunlight streamed between the buildings as Sundar drove toward the address in the letter. The streets shifted from the polished bustle of the financial district to quieter blocks, where small markets and aging apartment complexes stood shoulder to shoulder. The closer he got, the more he noticed how the air felt different here, slower, more lived in, the kind of place where neighbors knew each other's names. He parked a short distance away, stepping out into the crisp air. The building was 3 stories tall, its paint faded, the edges weathered by years of wind and rain. Flower pots lined some of the balconies, their colors soft against the worn walls. He climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor, each step echoing in the stillness. When he reached the door marked with the number from the letter, he paused. The hallway was quiet except for the distant sound of a television from somewhere above. He raised his hand to knock, but hesitated. For a brief moment, he thought about turning back. It would be so easy to tell himself that the truth didn't matter, that his life was already full, that some stones were better left unturned. But then he thought of the letter's closing words. Please come before Friday. After that, I may not be here to tell you. He knocked. There was a pause. Footsteps. The door opened slowly. The man who stood before him was older than Sundar had imagined. His frame thin, his skin lined with years. His hair was mostly gray, and his posture carried the faint hunch of someone who had endured more than one lifetime's worth of burdens. But it was the eyes that stopped Sundar, the same warm brown as his own. The same way they seemed to search a person's face as if looking for something unspoken. For a moment, neither spoke. Then the man gave a faint smile, his voice rough, but steady. You came? You're Raghavan? Sundar asked quietly. The man nodded. Yes, please. Come in. Inside, the apartment was small but neat. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains, casting soft patterns on the floor. A faint scent of sandalwood hung in the air, and on the small dining table sat 2 cups, one already filled with tea. It was clear he had been expecting him. They sat facing each other. Sundar noticed how Raghavan's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his cup. For a long moment, the older man simply looked at him, as though memorizing his face. You look like your mother, Raghavan said, finally, his voice breaking just slightly. But your eyes, they're mine. Sundar didn't know how to respond, so he waited. Raghav and set his cup down. I owe you the truth. All of it. I loved your mother before she married the man who raised you. We thought we could make a life together, but the world we lived in, it wasn't ready for that. I left to spare her from the shame our families promised would come. I'd told myself I would return once I could give her more. But when I finally tried, it was too late. She was married and you had been born. His gaze dropped. Your father, the one you know, he is a good man. He gave you his name, his home, his guidance. I could not give you those things then. But I could watch from afar, make sure you had what you needed, even if it meant you never knew my face. Sundar listened in silence, feeling the words settle into the empty spaces of his past. Raghavan's voice grew heavier. I didn't just leave because of love. I left because there was troubled people I owed money to, mistakes I made when I was younger. If they had found me, they could have hurt her or you, so I stayed away. But I never stopped caring. I never stopped being proud of the man you became. There was a long pause. Sundar felt something shift in not forgiveness yet, but the first stirring of understanding. Raghavan leaned forward, his voice almost a whisper. I don't expect you to call me father. I don't expect you to erase the life you've lived, but I am asking for one thing. Don't let me leave this world without you knowing that my absence was never because I didn't love you. It was because I loved you too much to bring my chaos into your life. The words landed with unexpected force. Sundar's chest tightened, his eyes stinging. He thought about all the years he had built his life on what he believed was complete truth, never realizing there was a hidden layer beneath it all. Finally, he spoke. You should have come sooner. Raghavan's eyes glistened. I know. Silence filled the room again, but it wasn't empty. It was heavy, charged with all the years they had lost. Then Sundar stood, moving toward the small window where sunlight poured in. He thought of his mother, of the man who had raised him, of Anjali, who had carried this truth for so long. And then he thought of the man sitting quietly at the table, who had made impossible choices in a flawed world. He turned back, walked to the table, and sat again. Tell me about your life, he said softly. All of it. Start from the beginning. For the first time, a full smile spread across Raghavan's face. And in that moment, the years between them began to close, not erased, but bridged by the simple act of listening. 2 hours later, when Sundar finally left the apartment, the letter was back in his pocket, but it felt lighter somehow. He stepped into the sunlight with a strange mixture of grief and peace. The truth had not shattered him. It had given him something he didn't know he was missing. As he walked down the street, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Anjali. How did it go? He typed back slowly, choosing his words. It's not about what he told me. It's about what I finally felt. I think I found the part of me I didn't know was lost. And for the first time in days, he smiled.